Why a narcissist never wants to discuss their actions. There is one thing that consistently unsettles a narcissist more than conflict itself in any relationship. It is not criticism, disagreement, or even emotional confrontation that creates the deepest discomfort for them. It is being asked to calmly explain their actions in a structured and accountable way. Because accountability is the one environment where control becomes difficult to maintain and reshape. When a narcissist is forced to discuss what they did, their carefully built emotional narrative starts to feel threatened. They are no longer able to reshape the story in their favor without facing direct resistance or clarity. And that is where the internal discomfort begins to surface, even if they do not show it outwardly. A simple question like, "Why did you do that?" can feel deeply destabilizing in these dynamics. Not because the question is aggressive, but because it demands reflection they have learned to avoid over time. Narcissists often build their identity around being right, justified, or fundamentally misunderstood by others. So any discussion of their actions feels like a direct challenge to the identity they are protecting. Instead of exploring their behavior honestly, they instinctively shift toward protecting their self-image and emotional control. This is why conversations rarely stay focused when accountability becomes the central topic of discussion. They may change the subject without you even realizing how quickly the direction of conversation has shifted. They may reframe the situation so they become the victim instead of the person being questioned. They may bring up your past mistakes to dilute attention from their present behavior and actions. Or they may simply deny details that are uncomfortable, inconvenient, or damaging to their preferred narrative. All of these behaviors serve one core psychological purpose beneath the surface of the interaction. It is the protection of their self-image at all costs, even if truth becomes secondary in the process. Because deep down, many narcissists are extremely sensitive to perceived flaws, rejection, or emotional exposure. But instead of processing shame in a healthy way, they convert it into defensiveness, blame, or emotional control. This is why calm and rational conversations often turn emotionally confusing or exhausting very quickly for others. You may enter a discussion seeking clarity, understanding, or simple acknowledgement of what actually happened, but you often leave feeling blamed, misunderstood, or mentally drained without receiving real answers. That emotional confusion is not accidental in these relational dynamics, even if it feels chaotic in the moment. It often emerges when accountability threatens their internal sense of superiority or emotional stability. When facts are presented clearly and calmly, they lose the ability to distort perception as easily as before. So they shift away from logic and move into emotional strategies that protect their internal narrative instead. They may become sarcastic, dismissive, or overly analytical to avoid emotional exposure or vulnerability. They may also act offended very quickly, simply to redirect the conversation away from factual accountability. In many cases, they will suggest that you are overreacting, misunderstanding, or being too emotional about everything. This reframes accountability into an emotional problem instead of a behavioral issue that needs addressing. And once the conversation becomes emotional instead of factual, control becomes significantly easier for them to regain. Because emotional debates are far easier to manipulate, redirect, or exhaust than structured factual discussions. A narcissist also avoids discussing actions because it creates internal discomfort they are not willing to sit with. Even if they appear confident, calm, or detached externally, internal contradictions still exist beneath the surface. They often know when their behavior does not match the image they are trying to present to the world. But instead of resolving that contradiction, they choose avoidance. Because reflection feels too uncomfortable or threatening. Discussing actions forces them to confront gaps between perception and reality that they actively try to suppress. And that confrontation is exactly what they have spent years learning how to avoid in relationships. This is also why silence, withdrawal, or sudden emotional distance often follows difficult conversations with them. It is not always punishment, but often a form of emotional reset and avoidance of internal discomfort. They need distance to regain control over their internal narrative and emotional state after feeling challenged. Because without that distance, uncomfortable truths begin to linger longer than they are willing to tolerate. Another reason they avoid accountability is fear of losing dominance in relationships and social perception. When someone calmly analyzes their behavior, the power dynamic shifts in a way they do not like. They are no longer the one defining reality, meaning, or interpretation of what just happened. And that shift can feel threatening to their emotional stability and sense of relational control. So they resist it through deflection, charm, irritation, or sudden changes in emotional tone. What looks like confusion or unpredictability is often a strategic emotional redirection away from accountability, because clarity reduces their ability to influence perception, and influence is central to how they maintain control. Over time, this creates a very predictable pattern in their behavior during serious conversations. Discussions rarely stay focused on their actions for long before being redirected elsewhere. The conversation either becomes about your reaction, the past, or the emotional tone of the discussion itself, and the original question quietly disappears without real resolution or meaningful accountability. This leaves the other person feeling unheard, mentally exhausted, and often questioning their own perception. But the narcissist feels relief because accountability was successfully avoided once again. Understanding this pattern is important because it brings emotional clarity to confusing relational experiences. It reveals that avoidance is not random behavior, but a deeply structured psychological defense mechanism. It is designed to protect identity, control perception, and avoid emotional discomfort at all costs. And once you begin to see this clearly, the confusion starts to lose much of its emotional power, because you stop expecting accountability from a system that is fundamentally designed to avoid it. Instead, you start recognizing patterns instead of getting lost in individual arguments or explanations. And that recognition is often where emotional clarity and detachment finally begin to form.